In this lesson, we will be working on showing error message to our users when there is a failed connection to this API endpoint. And in the meantime, we will be learning how we can create a custom widget inside of a Dart file without creating a new file. Alright. So the first thing that I want to do is to make this URL invalid and then hot restart my app. And here you can see that we are getting this alert dialog because in this try catch, inside of this catch block we have this show dialog option. So we are getting this dialog, but instead of this I want to print the error right over here, and I want a button that says try again, and when that button is clicked I want to refresh the data from an URL by executing this get data. Alright, so let's create a new boolean over here. So the first boolean is loading, that is responsible for the loading status, and there will be another boolean which is responsible for the error status. So bool as error equals to false. Alright, now we need to set this error to true when there is an exception caught in our API request. So is loading equals to false and is error equals to true, because when there is an error we will be setting this is error to true, and then state will be notified by this set state. Alright, and when there is a successful request then we will be changing this is error to false. Alright, so when there is a successful request, is error is false, and when there is a failed request, is error is set to true, and then by using the set state we are updating the state or notifying the state about it. Alright, and now by using this is error boolean I will be conditionally rendering an error message. Alright, so let's copy this and let's move to the list view builder. So when there is a loading we will be getting this circle progress indicator, and when the loading is complete then we will be displaying this list view, right? And this is the place where you want to display either a list view or a error message. So if there is an error, so if this is true then I will be displaying a text error, and if not I will be displaying this list view. So let's save it, and now let's hot restart the app. And here you can see that we have an error message instead of a list view. Alright, so now let's remove this alert dialog because this will So let's scroll a little bit and reach the main screen, meaning that list view builder and the code above it. So if you have a look at this code, then it's a little bit complex. It's a lot messier, right? Because there are a lot of conditions inside of it. So what I want to do now is to refactor this code and keep it somewhere else. And this time I'll not be creating a new file and creating a stateless or a stateful widget, because this error screen is only shared or only used by this main screen and it will not be used anywhere else. So why create an extra file if you only want to use it once? So one thing to keep in mind while creating or refactoring a widget is that if this widget can be used for multiple times or in multiple files, then you need to create a new file and then you can refactor this widget. But if it is used by only one dart file, then it is not necessary for creating a new file and refactoring it, right? You can refactor it in the same page. So let's see how this can be done. So let me show you how you can create a custom widget from inside of a dart file. So let's move into our code and let's create a function over here. So void error widget. Alright, you can name this anything. And this error widget function will return a widget, so the return type will be widget. Alright, and if the return type is widget, we should be returning a widget inside of it, so return. And for now, file. Alright, so let's replace this text widget by an actual error message. So copy this widget, or better, let's cut this and paste it over here. So now instead of this complex widget, we can use this error widget in our code. So if there is an error, we will be using this error widget and we need to use parentheses over here. Alright. So for making our code base easier to read and understand, we can refactor our widgets into a smaller widget like so. Alright. So now we can go ahead and refactor this list view as well. So let's create a new widget. So the return type will be widget and then the list data. And whenever you are working with a widget, it's better to keep the name as widget so you can find it in an easier way. Alright. And we need to return a widget inside of it and we'll be returning this list view. So this starts here, it ends here. So let's cut it from here and then let's use it as a return statement. So let's save our code and then use this list data widget over here. And now our condition is clear. So if there is a loading, we'll be getting this loading screen, and if not, if there is an error, we'll be getting this error widget, and if not, we'll be getting this list data widget. So our code is easier to read. And if you want to move into this widget, press Ctrl and then click at it and you will be moved to that line of code. Alright. So instead of creating a new file, we created a widget function, which is actually an widget, and we passed it in our code so it is easier to read and maintainable. Alright. And in this custom widget, we can also pass a dynamic data. So if this widget was on another file or another class, then we used constructor for passing the data, but as this is in our same file, we can use argument for passing the data. And the actual data will be fetched from the URL. So that's it for this lesson, and in the next lesson we will be working on further refining this app. So I'll see you at the next lesson. In this lesson we will be working on some features on our app. So when I click this item in the list view, this new window pops up. So what I want to do now is to create a button over here, and when this button is clicked, I want a popover menu over here, and this menu has two items: delete and mark this item as complete. So let's move into this view item screen to get started. Alright, and we want something over here, and for that we need to access the actions of an app bar. So actions, and we'll be placing the button over here. This time we will not be using any elevated button, text or outline button, but we will be using a special button called pop menu button. So if you hover into this item builder, it expects a function which returns a list. So let's create an anonymous function over here. Anonymous function, and it has a callback value of context, and inside of it we need to return a list. So return an empty list. Alright, so let's save it. And here you can see this pop menu button. So if I click this, nothing happens because we have nothing inside of this list. And if you have a look at this item builder again, it expects a function that returns a special kind of list called pop menu entry. So inside of it we cannot use any widget like text widget, but we should be using a special widget called pop menu item. Alright, so this is what we will be using. So this expects a widget as a child, so we will be passing a text widget delete. Alright, so now if I click at this, I'll be getting this delete over here. And as this is a list, I can use multiple widgets over here. So let's copy this, and I can change this to mark as complete. And here I'll be getting these multiple options. So first let's work on this delete option. So when this option is clicked, I want to show a delete confirmation alert dialog. So let's get on to it. So for handling the clicks, we have an argument in this pop menu button called onSelected. Alright, and this expects a function with an callback value of value. Alright, and we can print the value here to see what data we get. Value. And then we need to define the value from inside of this pop menu item. So the value of this will be, say, 1. And value of this will be 2. Alright. So now if I click this delete, then you will be getting this one. So we can use this condition for displaying the alert dialog. So if value equals to 1, then we will be showing a alert dialog here. So show dialog, and the first argument is the context, and second argument is a function that has context as a value, and from inside of it we will be returning a alert dialog. Alright, and this will have a title of text widget. Are you sure to delete? And then we will have two actions over here. So the first one will be a text our dialog will disappear. Alright, so now it's time we work on actual delete functionality. For that, let's open up the Postman, and now let's duplicate this get request. So right click and then duplicate, and let's rename it to delete data. Alright, and then this will be of method delete. And now if I make this request, all data in our bucket list will be deleted. So if you try to get the bucket list again, then there is no data in the bucket list. As all the data is deleted from the list, we are getting this null response from the request. But in our app, we were only accepting the list data. So let's see what happens to our app. So now if I navigate into the main page and refresh this list, so here you can see that I am getting this error connecting. And if you move into this main screen dot, our URL is valid and everything is fine, but why is this error being triggered? And this is triggered because we are trying to set response data to a list, but currently we are getting a null value, so this cannot be assigned to a list. So there is error in this block, and this catch block is responsible for showing this error. So this try catch block can handle all the errors, not only the API errors, alright? But this error connecting is not expected behavior. This error connecting should only be displayed if we cannot connect to a URL or there is internet connection issues. But this time we are connected to a internet and this URL is valid and we are getting the data, so showing error connecting might not be a suitable option. For that, what needs to be done is we need to check this data, and if data is a valid list, then we will be displaying this data in the list, and if not, we will be displaying something else. So for that, I need to apply a condition over here. So if response.data is list, so we are checking if the data is a list. So if it is a list, we'll do something here, and if not, we'll do something over here. So if the data is a list, we'll be passing this to bucket list, and if not, we'll be assigning an empty list to this bucket list data. Alright? So now if I click a try again, then I'll be getting this empty list. So now let's move into this list view builder, and we will be using the conditional rendering for showing no data on your list if the data is empty. So this part is and let's repopulate the data. For that, let's use this add initial bucket list, and we have this JSON data ready. So let's send the request, and this will bring up our previous request. So if you mess anything up, then you can always reset the data by using this put request. Alright, so here you can see we have all this data. Now let's refresh the page by using this refresh button, and here we have repopulated the data using our old JSON data. Alright, so that's it for this lesson, and in the next lesson we will be working on deleting a single data, because in Postman, if you are trying to delete a data, all data from our bucket list is being deleted. So we need to fix that, and we will be fixing that and more in the next lesson. So I'll see you at the next lesson. In this lesson, we will be working on delete functionality in our app. So for that, let's move into the Postman to have a look at the delete request. So we have this delete request in our Postman, but if we execute this request, then all the data in our bucket list will be deleted. And this is not what we want. We only want to delete a single item from a bucket list, right? So for deleting only a single item from our bucket list, we need to pass an index for deleting that data. Say for instance, if you want to delete the first item of this list, you need to provide the 0 index in our URL. So bucket list and then /0, which means the index.json. Alright. And if you execute this, then the data of that index will be deleted. So let's rerun this request. So here you can see that the first index data has been deleted, and we are getting this null value at the first index. Now typically in an API, whenever you remove a data is removed completely, but in this real-time database, they replace it by a null value. And by replacing this data with a null value is how an API of real-time database works. There's nothing that we can do. As a front-end developer, we need to accept the rules of a backend or of a system, right? And this is because each API works differently, and we need to follow the rules of an API, right? And in this real-time database, this is how we get a result. So we need to handle it in our Flutter app. And whenever you are working with other API, this delete might actually remove the data, right? And the method of calling this delete request or get request might be different, but it does not matter. As long as you have the documentation and you know the method of calling the API, that should not be a problem, right? And this is the response that we get from real-time database, so deal with it, alright? So let's move into our app. And now, if we refresh the page, then our app might crash. And here you go. But everything is fine in our code. So why has this error occurred? This is a runtime error, and if you are having trouble getting into the exact error, then navigate into this debug tab and check this uncaught exceptions. Alright. So if you reload the page, reload the request, then the debugger will be paused on error. So you can have a look at this exact error now. So in the previous lesson, I instructed you to uncheck this uncaught exception, and this was because our debugger was being paused every now and then without any issues. But this is very handy for catching the runtime error. So by default you can turn this off, but if you are having trouble catching the issues, then you can turn this on and then find the issue. Alright. So our debugger is able to find this error, and the error has occurred in this part of our code. So it is inside of this list data widget, and the error reads that the method list was called on null. So if you remember the response of our get request, then the first value of the list was null, right? Because it was removed. But if you look into our code, you can see that we are trying to get this image key from a map object. But as this data is null, we cannot get the data from a map object, so our app has crashed. So what needs to be done to handle this issue is we need to provide a fallback value to it. But we already have a fallback value, but that will only fall back to this value if this image key does not exist in a map object. But we are not checking if the map object actually exists, right? And for that we can use this question mark over here. By using this question mark here, we are instructing Dart that if this object is null, then directly move to the fallback value and don't check this key. Alright. So now if Dart finds this value to be null, then it will fall back to this fallback value. You can also refer to this as a skip. Alright. So if this is null, then skip and reach to the fallback value. So we need to do the same for all the items. So question mark here and here as well. Alright, save the code, remove this uncaught exception, and then hot restart. And here you can see that due to the first value being null in the list, Dart has fallback to all the empty string values. But we don't want this empty list style over here, right? So what can be done here is that before rendering this list style, we need to check if the data that we are receiving on a list is actually a map object. So this item builder is responsible for building a single item in the list, right? And this is the actual data in that list. So if we pass the index in the list, then we will be getting the exact data. So we should check this data if this data is actually an object. And only if this is an object, we need to render this list style. So what can be done here is that we can check if bucket list and then index and the data in that index is map. So surround this by a parenthesis, and this is the first condition. So if this condition meets, then we will be displaying this list style, and we also should provide this else statement over here. So else, so list style ends here. So else we will be providing a sized box, and sized box without an argument is invisible thing, right? So let's save it, and here instead of rendering the list style, an invisible object has been rendered, and this is because the first value in the list was null, and because it was not a map, this list style was not rendered, but the sized box was rendered. So now let's actually work on this delete functionality. So for that, let's move into this view item, and for deleting the data in real-time database, we need an index, right? So index also needs to be passed to this view item from the main screen. So let's create an integer over here, integer index, and this will be a required parameter. So required this dot index. Alright, so now we have the SS of index in this page, and we need to pass this from the main screen. So let's move into this view item, and the index will be the index of this part. So index. So let's save it, and let's try to display the index over here somewhere. So maybe hot restart is required, so hot restart it. So after the hot restart is done, let's try displaying this index over here somewhere. So inside of this column, let's keep a text widget, and then widget.index as a string, dot to string, because it accepts a string, and this to string will convert anything into a string. This converted integer to string. So index is being displayed here, so everything seems to be working fine. Now we'll be using this index to delete this data from our list or from the bucket list. Alright, so let's create a function over here inside of this state class. So void delete data. Alright, and we need to use do over here, so let's import it. So import package do/do.dart. Because we need to wait for it a little bit, and as this is await, our function need to be async, and as this is async, our return type need to be wrapped with a future. So future void, and then everything is done. So now if I click at this and if I click at delete, then I need to provide this, or I need to call this function from this delete option or from this confirm option, right? So let's move into this and let's wrap it with an inkwell. So inkwell, and then on tap, let's pass this delete data. And when this confirm is pressed, I want to dynamically press this back button, programmatically press this back button. So let's use this navigator.pop over here. Alright. So this will dismiss the dialog, and then when the data is actually deleted, I want this to move into the previous screen. So let's use this navigator.pop inside of this do delete as well. So now if I reopen this, so delete, and then if I click at confirm, then this will be deleted and will be moved to the main screen. So if I refresh this, then data is no longer here. So let's navigate into the Postman and be getting this again, and if I click at it and then delete, then I'll move back to this screen if the data is deleted, but this list is not refreshing. It would be great if this was refreshed automatically, right? So if I refresh, this data is actually gone, but the main screen is not being refreshed automatically. So for that we need to detect if the user is back to the previous screen from a new screen, right? So let's move into this main screen.dart and let's find the code which is responsible for opening the new screen when this is clicked. So this is probably inside of this list data widget, list view builder, and in on tap, right over here. So for detecting if the user is back to this screen, we can use this .then, meaning that user has navigated back to this screen, and inside of this .then we'll have a parenthesis and an anonymous function or a callback function with a value as a callback value. Alright, and what needs to be done here is to call this get data over here. Alright, so if the user is navigated back to this screen, then we will be automatically calling this get data. So now if I click at skydiving and then if I delete it, the user moves back and this will detect it and automatically refresh the page. Alright, so that's it for this lesson, and in the next lesson we will be working on patch requests. So I'll see you at the next lesson. In this lesson we will be working on this mark as complete option, but before that I want to address an issue in our app. So whenever I am at this screen and I press back, this main screen gets reloaded, and this is because in our main screen.dart we have a code here that whenever user navigates back to this page, we will be running this get data, right? But if I am not deleting or editing anything here, then reloading the main page doesn't make any sense. So we need to execute this get data conditionally, meaning that if in our view page we edit or delete data, then only we need to reload the main page, right? So the execution of this get data should be defined by the view item page. So let's navigate into it. So if you look into this delete data function, then this is responsible for actually deleting the data, right? And this navigator.pop is responsible for dismissing the dialog, and this navigator.pop is actually responsible for the programmatic back button, meaning that when this is executed, then the user will be returning to this page. So in this part of our code, we need to notify this main screen that the data has been actually deleted, and now we need to refresh the page. Otherwise, we don't need to refresh the page, alright? So for that, we can pass the data from this navigator.pop. So the first argument is the context, and in the second argument we can pass any data type. We can pass boolean, string, integer, number, anything over here. So for now I'll be passing the string refresh. And the data that you pass from this navigator.pop will be received by this navigator.push on this callback value. So here we can write a condition. So if value equals to refresh, then only we need to execute this get data. Alright. So now if I open the view screen and I press the back button, then this refresh argument is not sent, so the data is not reloaded. But if I actually delete the data, then the data is removed and we are sending this refresh argument, so the page is actually refreshed. Alright. So now let's work on mark as complete option. For that we need data. So let's navigate into the Postman and let's execute this add initial bucket. So now we have some data in our bucket list, but this time I want to modify this map object and add a new key value pair to it. By using this new key and value pair, we will be able to detect if the task has completed. So let's add a new key and value to this map object. So completed, and the value will be boolean, true or false. So if the task is completed, this completed will be true, and if not, it will be false. Alright. And as the tasks are not completed by default, let's keep this completed as false. And let's keep it here as well. Alright. So now if I send the request, then you can see new completed key over here. So currently there are two tasks in our bucket list and both are incomplete, meaning the completed is false. So now let's send the get request to see if we have this updated data. And we have this new key value pair over here as well. So let's move into our app and let's refresh it. And we have these two objects over here. So now if I click at the item and click at mark as complete, then this will change the completed from false to true. Alright, so let's work on that. But before we dive into our code, let's create a new request in Postman. So now duplicate this delete data and change this to something like complete data, complete task. Alright, and this request method will be the patch method, because we are trying to edit the data, so we will be using this patch method, and this is what API documentation of real-time database suggests us or instruct us. Alright, so patch, and then in body we need to send the data that we want to modify. So if I want to modify the completed to true, I'll be passing a map object and not the list. Alright, so I'll be passing here completed equals to true. So this time I am not sending a map object like I did in this put request, but instead I am sending this map object over here, and I am sending this map object in the bucket list /0.json. So this will modify this completed key and change it to true. Alright, so if I send this request, then the data of 0 index will be modified and completed will change to true. So let's use this get bucket list. And here you can see that this completed has been turned or set to true. Alright, so this task is there will be a key completed. This will be set to true. Alright. Now we need to send this data into the patch request, and for that we have a second argument called data. Alright. And by using this data you can send any data into the patch, post, put or any other request. Alright. So the data value will be this data. And now we need to call this mark as complete when this option is clicked. So let's copy this function and let's move into this pop-up menu. And if the value is 1, we will be showing this alert dialog. And if the value equals to 2, then we will be executing this mark as complete. Alright. So the first one, delete, has a value of 1 and this has value of 2. So if value is 2, we will be using or we will be calling this mark as complete. So let's save the code. And let's open up this pop-up menu again. And I guess this skydiving or this visit Nepal already has this completed equals to true in one item. So let's move into the postman again and let's rerun this initial request. So here let's rerun this so that both has this completed equals to false. This is false and this is false as well. And if you get the data, then you can see both the items has this completed key as false. Let's move into the code and click at skydiving. And if I click at this mark as complete, then the data will be sent and we have reached the main screen, but we are showing all the data over here and we will be using this filter in our next lesson. So let's move into the postman and see if the data is actually updated. So here if I send the request again, then you can see that the skydiving completed has been changed to true. So that's it for this lesson, and in the next lesson we will be working on filtering list data. So I'll see you at the next lesson. In this lesson we will be working with filtering data from the list. So navigate into datpad.dev so you can follow along with me. So as you can see, I have this list of integers and there are some values inside of it, and I have a task in which I need to create another list from this sum numbers list where the numbers are less than 100. So basically I need to filter this sum numbers list and get only the results or values that are less than 100. And by using these numbers I need to create another list. So let's go ahead and create another list. So list, it will hold the integers and the variable name will be filtered data. For now I will be just assigning this sum numbers to this filtered data. Alright. So let's create an entry point. So void main, and then I'll be printing this filtered data over here. So if I run this code now, then I'll be getting all the data from these sum numbers in our filtered list. Alright. Now I need to filter the data so that I only get the numbers that are less than 100. So for that I can use this .where in list. And then for converting this to .compactable list, I should be using .toList. So whenever you are creating a list from another list, make sure you always use this .toList. This toList will convert any list to .compactable list. Alright. So now let's get into this main part where. And inside of this parenthesis of where, we will have a function. So let's create an anonymous function inside of it. And this anonymous function or this callback function will have a callback value. Let's name it as element. Alright. And from inside of this callback value, we need to return a boolean, either true or false. So let's return true for now. So return true. Alright. Now if I run this code, then you can see that I've got the same numbers as previous. Right. There is nothing changed between the sum numbers and filtered data. But if I change this return to false, and if I run this, then you can see that I've got an empty list over here. So let's try to understand how this where works. So the function that you see inside of this where will run for exact number of time the length of this list. So currently there are 6 items in this list, right? So this function will run for 6 times, one for each data inside of this list. And the boolean value that is returned from this function will determine if this data will be saved in this new list. And currently we are returning only false from this function. All of this data are being ignored. But if we change this to true, then all of this data will be saved to this filtered data. Alright. So here instead of using this return true or false for all the data, we can use condition and then return boolean conditionally. So now let's work on conditionally returning true or false based on these values. So the function that you see over here will run for 6 times, each time for an individual element, right? So when it runs for the first time, the value of this element is set to 10, and for the second time it's set to 20, for the third time it's set to 200, and so on. So each time this function run, this element has the value of that particular data in which the list is looping or this list is running. Alright. So now if I print this element over here and run this code, then you can see that for determined by the return status or return boolean of this where function. Alright. And as we only need to return a boolean from inside of it, we can use only this condition for returning true or false. So if this condition matches, then this will provide a response of true, right? So why not return this statement from here? And let's remove all of this. So if the element is less than 100, then this becomes true and true is returned. And if this is more than 100, then false is returned, right? So we don't need this messier statement over here. We can replace this by simple return with a condition. And I can further minimize this code by using arrow function. So let's see what arrow function means in Dart, JavaScript or any other programming language. So for understanding arrow function, let me create a function over here that returns an string. So string return type and then some string, which is a variable for the function, and this returns a string, say ABC. Alright. Now let's print this some string function over here because this returns an string. We'll be getting ABC over in our debug console. And here you can see that we have this ABC. So if there is only one thing that is returned from a function, or there is only one line that is a return statement, then instead of using this return keyword and then the parenthesis, we can use arrow function for making our code cleaner and easier to understand. So for that we can remove this parenthesis, we can remove this return and directly use this arrow function over here. So this is equivalent of writing parenthesis and return. So anything that is at the right side of this function will be returned to this function. So now if I run this code, then you can see that I have got the same output, and this time I am not using return and then parenthesis, but I am using this flat arrow over here. Alright. So anything that is at the right side of this flat arrow is returned to this function. Alright. And we can use this same in our where as well. So instead of having this parenthesis, let's remove it. Let's remove this return keyword and simply use this flat arrow over here. And value in our filter data. Alright, now I can also apply multiple conditions over here. So if element equals to apple or element equals to kiwi, so here when the function is running, if the element matches apple or kiwi, then it will be saved to the filter data. Alright, so if I run this code, then the filter data will hold apple and kiwi. So we can use multiple conditions. All we need to do is either return true or false. So this is how you filter a data from a list in Dart. So that's it for this lesson, and in the next lesson we will be using the concept of filtering the data for displaying only the non-completed bucket list data. So I'll see you at the next lesson.